Hello everyone, welcome back. Here we are on to the next set of decks here. We're going to continue in the steel vein and move on to one deck I've been a big fan of as of late. In the past couple challenges I've played blue steel and I've really enjoyed my time playing, so we're going to have to update it though because a lot has changed. No longer are the days where we can kind of rely on Baboom and Argus to really be one of the prominent ways we answer characters, whether it be Sisu or Flynn with Argus. Baboom helping against Diablo. Baboom is still in the deck, of course, but we really had to change our game plan, I think, overall to a much more questing and lore focused kind of deck there, with our answers being more tempo weapons than anything else, and really trying to propel ourselves into the mid to late game. We'll kind of go back here and forward. There's a lot to take in. I wanted to take a minute just to look through the new cards that are in the deck, as opposed to last time. I didn't have Captain Hook, I didn't have Smee, I didn't have well, mainly those two weren't from the previous sets, but Tipo is one of the new inclusions there. Pete as well, Mufasa and Cusco. There's a lot there. And you'll also notice we're only playing 3 copies of Fortisphere, not 4. What's missing? Big things to note here. There are no copies of Tamatoa in this deck list. Additionally, there are no copies of Lucky Dime in this deck list. Those are very intentional. We've mentioned in some of the previous videos some of the more aggressive takes that people have taken. Cards like Daisy Duck, and if you look at the Amethyst Amber Aggro deck there, Daisy Duck, Donald, all those things really demand answers. No longer can I just rely on 4 Babooms to really kind of deal with things. I have to have Captain Hook and Smee. They're not only really good at helping pressure and check some of those characters there, they're not that bad at questing themselves. One of the big things I think Tamatoa and Lucky Dime were in the deck for was inevitability. I don't know if we need as much inevitability as we did prior in the previous formats, as much as we need ways to make sure we interact and then take over the game in one fell swoop. And with that being said, we're able to shave a Fortisphere because we're not relying on a critical mass of items with Tamatoa like we were before. It is still good. Items making Harm Flavor Shame even better, and kind of serving as fodder for that. Never a poor choice. And also the bodyguard part does come up. But Mufasa is a card that I've been very impressed with. Often you'd have to have a lot of things going for you, and it's kind of a risk to play out a Tamatoa. You really need to be in the late game, or you need to be in a well enough position where you don't really care if you get Be Prepared or anything like that, and really have it draw something. So a Popsicle is almost necessary in that sense if you haven't already used a Harem. Mufasa doesn't really care. You can play Mufasa out as soon as you get to 8 ink and just play it, and functionally you're drawing a couple cards. I do really like Mufasa, of course, when you specifically when you have Fishbone Quill, because it allows you to play a lot of kind of cool little what you ink underneath of it and what you don't, whether you put an excess copy of a card like Whole New World under there when you would have to play the first Whole New World and get rid of the second one anyway. You have the chance to then redraw it. But Mufasa is not quite a time walk, which is take an extra turn in terms from Magic when you quest with it, but it is very, very close, and it does feel like it might as well be sometimes. This deck's goal, in a lot of ways, is to have actual board presence. You do care about the board more so than you did prior, which is kind of telling because that's how the format's developing. You have to care about the board a lot more than you did before because of how aggressive everyone's going to be. And this is kind of playing into that. One thing that Mufasa also does is, in recent times, we've seen an uptick of Amber Steel songs, and they've also played a plethora number of cards like World's Greatest Criminal Mind to help deal with Tamatoa, but namely they wanted to fight the 3-cost inkable Sisu, which often would have 5 strength as early as turn 3, and they wanted a cheap answer to it. So kind of having us be able to dodge that card entirely, which I do expect to eventually fall out of the metagame, but early on at least, having our primary threat be one that dodges it by itself, as well as gaining a bunch of lore without any kind of help. One thing I've always harped on with playing this deck previously in the previous format against a deck like Ruby Amethyst is Harem Flavor Sham was actually one of your worst cards, and you wanted to use Whole New World more often as a card draw engine than Harem, namely because you wanted to maintain a certain amount of items in play so your Tamatoas were always threatening. I will say this deck did lose a little bit of pugnancy against Ruby Amethyst, against the card Be Prepared, and some of this more spot removal that we've seen be played like B-King Undisputed, but I do expect B-King to fall off a little bit because we don't have a card like Lucky Dime to close the game out and add extra lore to the board. We are kind of working with what you see in play. Now that is a metagame call that is more kind of contingent on Ruby control decks not being the primary decks to fight against, which I don't think they are currently. I think Pete is going to do a very good job in the aggressive decks to keep that kind of out of the metagame for now with Ursula and Pete now. Be Prepared's never really looked worse, I believe. So I think people have to find alternate avenues. But Moving on, I'm a big fan right now of Mufasa. It's helped a ton, and one of our main goals is to get to a game state where we have it. Mufasa live for a single turn. That's really all you need. Whether it be having a character in play already to sing a whole new world, as soon as you get to untap with Mufasa, you really should be able to take over the game entirely at that point, whether it be by playing multiple copies of Tinkerbell. But really what we're aiming to do is play Mufasa, have it survive a turn, and then on the following turn, play a ton of cards and end with a Pete game referee. And at that point, Mufasa's almost unchallengeable. There's really not many things that can challenge into this. Sure, a Maui plus a Merlin Crab can take care of it, I suppose, but it's a lot to ask in a lot of different game states, and we even have backup plans for that, whether it be giving one of our characters Bodyguard with Fortisphere, or just having Cogsworth in play, or Cusco. But having a massive board happen all at once with a whole new world and then locking them out with Pete is one of this deck's primary game plans. And I do believe that Pete is a big part of why you don't need cards like Lucky Dime as well. Pete, including in this deck, while you won't really play it early most of the time, unless you want to buy a turn against a whole new world, you're going to have it there as a late game kind of closer to where your opponent has to help trying to answer your entire board or without being able to play any kind of actions, which is really impossible for most strategies to do so. Not many decks have the ability to kill Mufasa. Sure, an Ice Block plus a Medusa might be a bit of an issue, and of course the new copy of Scar, which banishes Mufasa, might, who knows, eventually be played. But really, most decks are going to be without an answer to Mufasa if it does stick around, and it can come down quite early as turn 5 in this deck. We kind of explained some of the big threat cards in the overall game plan here with the deck, but some of the new inclusions we've seen. Tippo is not a card I'm a super big fan of, outside of maybe Blurple, where you get to then pick this card up and then use it as ink, so it doesn't really feel like you're down a card when you play it. This card is there to double as additional copies of One Jump Ahead when you don't have it. I'm always going to be playing One Jump Ahead over Tippo if I have them both in my hand. I wouldn't say always, I would say 99% of the time I'm going to be doing that play. However, having a couple extra copies of this to help make sure that your game plan doesn't get derailed by some of the inconsistencies this deck can have with early copies of Grab Your Swords or extra Whole New Worlds really helps get to the mid to late game where this deck wants to be. I'm not playing 4 because, again, One Jump Ahead is just enough most of the time, but having a couple backup copies of One Jump Ahead functionally is really, I think, worth it. This deck draws a ton of cards. Whole New World's great at refilling your hand, so I'm not too concerned with the card disadvantage it's doing. And, in a pinch, Tippo plus a Captain Hook or Smee can help take out a Daisy, so the 1 strength is not irrelevant, but not as important. Speaking more towards, again, how Mufasa was working out in our deck and how we wanted to close the game out actually by questing, that's why Pete's back in the deck. You do need some characters to help threaten some lore gain, and Pete and Hook do a fantastic job, especially in combination with Cogsworth, to really pressure a board and make it so it's hard for anyone to really have a race work out for them in any kind of way, and also challenge your characters in any kind of profitable way. Harem's not going anywhere, of course. Tinkerbell either. The Baboom is, again, more speculative, still enters Diablo and Flynn. I'm not certain how the metagame is going to look. Baboom is a very specific kind of removal spell where you want to make sure it lines up against the threats you want. Of course, not entering Daisy is a little bit of a hindrance, but between Captain Hook and Smee, pairing one of those with the Baboom can take care of it immediately, and finishing anything off there that may have taken some damage from a Grab Your Sword or a challenge is well enough where I think it still warrants an inclusion for now. The package of Let It Go, Whole New World, Grab Swords is kind of here to stay, and of course the Popsicles and Fishbone Quills are nice as well. Cusco is, I would say, the last inclusion there I wanted to harp on for a moment. Cusco, while initially seems like a great answer and a punish for any kind of Ruby Amethyst decks that are using cards like Queen's Castle still, and even the library, definitely an answer for them, and sometimes the 1 ink you're giving them is far less relevant than the cards or lore they be gaining off of those items or locations. One thing to note is a common play pattern for this deck is a Fishbone Quill on turn 3. Just that by itself lets you get to 6 ink on turn 4. You get to go turn 3 Fishbone Quill with 3 ink something up to 4, and then the following turn ink for your turn and activate Quill up to 6. The importance of that is, in conjunction with any kind of Popsicle or Fortisphere effect, on the 6 ink turn 4 turn, you get to then play a Cusco and ink one of your Popsicles or Fortispheres, immediately putting up to a 7 ink on turn 4. And what's one away the following turn on turn 5 going to happen? It's going to be Mufasa. No more Fishbone Quills really needed. Using Cusco's pseudo Donald Duck effect, which is notably absent from this deck. I don't really think it warrants that kind of inclusion. I think we're past the point of any kind of mid to late game characters just being a pretty much vanilla body once they're in play mattering. Cusco kind of doubles as an ability to accelerate, as well as a way to answer opposing locations, which you'll notice there are no copies of Beast Hardheaded. I think it's Hardheaded, the 4/4 from set 1, and there's no copies of Rise of the Titans because Cusco does a good job of impersonating both those. And one of the other things that Cusco does in situations where I'd mentioned where we have Mufasa and Pete kind of locking out all kinds of actions in the mid to late game to try to end the game, in that same kind of breath there, you can use the extra ink available to you that Mufasa grants by readying your inkwell to then activate Cusco's ability multiple times in the late game to protect it from any kind of challenging as well. So not only are they locked out of spells by Pete, they're also locked out of challenging anything relevant because of Cusco. Really kind of a tight package that helps you close the game out. And again, we're not playing cards like Lucky Dime because I think that the format's a little too quick with what people are trying to do now to really, give you the breath to play a card like Lucky Dime. And yes, Mufasa does help, develop a lot of big ink cost cards. We do have to take into consideration that our finisher, which is Mufasa now, is not inkable versus Tamato, which was. So again, with that all in mind, that's why there's no Tamato and Dimes. Again, I'm aware it makes you a little bit more vulnerable and doesn't give you the ability to burst lore in any kind of way from hand. And that may be a hindrance where this deck might not be as strong because of that. This is more of an experiment and something I've had success with in testing. I have it built up right now and have had a lot of success playing against various decks because of the ability that Mufasa gives you just to have an insurmountable turn where you get so far ahead that there's nothing your opponent can really do to get back into it, especially when paired with a Pete. Or, again, we talked about Mufasa on turn 5. There's still nobody prepared for another 2 turns after that, so you might not even need it to Pete to protect your Mufasa at that point. But something to keep in mind, and I think something I'm going to be looking forward to playing and fine-tuning a bit more even as the weeks go on before Las Vegas in about a month. We do have a lot of room to see where people are going to be at and how the format evolves, if cards like Captain Hook or Smee are even necessary anymore. Maybe Daisy falls out entirely, but it's always good to be prepared against the aggressive decks to make sure you have a fighting chance, because they're always the most frustrating and easiest to get 2-0'd by. Next up here, we're going to move along to another deck, one that I think got a lot more tools than people might have thought from this set from the previous one, is the Emerald Amber kind of under the sea control deck, I would say. Really how I kind of justify, or how I quantify it. It got some pretty interesting ones. You might not see too many new cards in this deck list here. Namely, Hypnotic Deduction, Ana are the big, really only standouts in this deck. This deck was fringe playable. It was doing well in the hands. I think Zach Bivens did well with it in Dallas, and other people have done well. I know Cranderson has done well as well. This is a specific take on it. I think that people might gravitate towards. There's a lot of benefits too as well. Ana, particularly having the versatility of being able to finish damage characters, buff other characters' strength, and also make them discard cards. The fact that it really has 2 strength and combining with the muses, the mid to late game, really gives it the edge in my opinion. It's also a relatively heavy lore character. One thing this deck has struggled with, and we've seen a lot of Emerald decks struggling with, is the ability to close games out in a timely manner. And Ana does that. Yes, it is uninkable. The uninkable count in this deck is relatively low. There's not too many. There's, I believe, 14, which is about the maximum I want to see in a deck like this. But it's definitely been an interesting inclusion, and the versatility of it, being able to play it on turn 3 to help challenge a board if you need to, or on turn 5 as a way to take out their last card in hand, a role we've seen similarly filled by Lucifer in the past, or cards like Cricky. This can do either or even Daisy Duck, the 4-cost Daisy Duck, either or, and really kind of make a name for itself in that way. The other inclusion, again, Hypnotic Deduction, is Brainstorm, draw 3, put 2 back on top. And the reason for the inclusion of that is the inclusion here of the Mulan. The Setsu Mulan is a 4-cost 3/3 2-lore character that when it quests, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a song, you play it for free. Very similar to how the Robin Hood from set 4 has functioned with actions. This one's only song-based. So while you don't have as many songs as you would want to consistently hit all the time with only having 19, Hypnotic Deduction lets you kind of set up the top card of your deck and gives you a back alley way of being able to play Under the Sea, even without the amount of characters required to sing together with it. Using a couple tricks here, Morph is an inclusion here. I've never really liked the 1-cost Kita in this deck. Kita has always been a bit awkward, as you really want to use its ink cost to help sing the Under the Sea together. You now have an option to use essentially a turn 1 Diablo turn 2 morph, and then turn 3 you can shift Kita onto the morph, and then Diablo onto the Diablo, and then play Under the Sea here, giving you just a few extra options. And also the Mulan does have shift too, meaning a turn, a morph in play on turn 4, you can, for 4 ink, play Hypnotic Seduction, put Under the Sea back on top, shift Mulan on top of morph, and then play Under the Sea immediately if you need to against aggressive decks. Gives you the ability to shift Mulan onto something, because there's no real Amber Mulans at all. There's one, it's a support 3 cost 2/3. That is support for 2 lore. Not really what this deck's looking to do, but morph doubling as a way to make Mulan and Kita viable may warrant the inclusion of more copies of it. I'm not certain how to fit that quite yet. I don't really want to shave on Diablo, and I'm still trying Ana out, and I do like it. But overall, this deck strategy is to kind of make your opponent discard as many cards as they can. Bare Necessities, Sudden Chill, and Ana really do a good job of helping discard. There is the removal here of You Have Forgotten Me. While that card is powerful, it is a little bit slow, and again, I'm a little concerned of Daisy Duck decks. With this deck having a higher action count, it is likely that Daisy Duck misses, so you don't really get the added benefit of drawing extra cards from theirs, and answering it has been a problem for this type of deck. As you can see, not much strength on a lot of these characters. Ana helps a little bit, and some decks play Cricky in this deck to help counter that as well. That is a known issue from theirs against the locations, but really, this deck does have a lot of potential. I think the draw 3 to put 2 cards back on top offers a good deal more to, again, set up the turn 2 shift Diablo, where you have the 1 cost Diablo in play. You then get to see 3 more cards on turn 2 to find the Diablo to shift to get that ball rolling even more consistently. And on top of that, of course, Ariel, being able to dig with Hypnotic Seduction, put some cards you don't want back on top, and you can put some back to the bottom, really giving you the Magic experience of Brainstorm plus fetching. Fetch lands, if those who've played Magic before, the ability to shuffle after using this effect is even more powerful than just using this effect blanketly, just by itself. Prince John, of course, pairing with all of our discard here, and the Muses giving us the ability to rebuy Ariels and rebuy Anas and anything else we may need. In some instances there, you can just use it to rebuy the Kita if you play it for a single turn and need a quest with a lot of things, and you're able to either have just played the Kita and quested with it, and then picked it back up and played the 1 cost underneath of it, or the morph underneath of it, since there's no 1 cost here. Be able to recur that when you play it, since it'll have 0 power from its own effect, is pretty valuable. It keeps your kind of characters safe from any kind of challenging. But certainly one I'm looking forward to trying some more. It may be that we want to be more, action-based with You Have Forgotten Me still, but certainly something that I would keep in mind, trying out the Mulan with the Hypnotic Seduction is the really big new card for this deck. Ursula helping, of course, to help sing Under the Sea, and some of the other songs there. There's no 3 or 4 cost songs in this color pair that really do too much, but really helping chip down on the cost for Under the Sea is one of the key things this deck wants to do. Ursula and the Muses, really, those two together, pretty hard to deal with 2 4 willpower characters, one of which is going to cost 2, and the other one has Ward to help that go through. But Painting the Roses Red shrinks some characters to make it so the Muses can bounce more than just things that cost 2, along with Kita, of course, shrinking as well in situations where you have a different song and need to return their character to their hand. But overall, a good deck. I do think that it has a lot of legs in this format. It is very much a niche deck that has a lot of play patterns you have to get used to. It's not apparent the first time go around, for sure. I will say it's something that you had to get used to. And again, kind of mentioning the disruptive package of Sudden Chill, Bare Necessities, Ursula, that's one reason I think Mulan has a bigger chance in this type of deck, because you're able to defend it from any kind of actions they can use to remove it. And aside from the Ursula 5th Spirit, the 5 cost 2/5, there's not really ways to interact with Mulan aside from that people play. Sure, Medusa, but not really something that I've seen in too many decks except for Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire, which we'll see how viable those are. Medusa is a fine card, but it does cost quite a bit to use by comparison to the 1 cost you're trying to answer. But that's all for this one here. We're going to come back here for our wrap-up. There's going to be one more video where we go over 3 of my favorite decks I've tried in this format, and ones I do expect there to be a lot of evolution on in the coming weeks, and a lot to talk about. But thanks again here. See you guys in the next one.